I'm Randy Cross. Welcome to the Randy Cross Podcast, Season 3, Episode 9. Bit of a truncated format for you this week. We're just going to have a feel-good, which you'll enjoy. Our normal hold my beer, happy trails at the end. But we're going to have an extended interview. This week, our interviewee is Charles Arbuckle, who played at UCLA, was an All-American tight end, played in the NFL for the Indianapolis Colts, and has spent several years in being involved in the media. And as he'll explain, also has a little side job in the pharmaceutical business. So without further delay, let's join Charles. All righty, welcome to the interview segment of the show. And as promised, Charles Arbuckle joins me, former UCLA All-American tight end, NFL with the Indianapolis Colts. Has worked for years in the media, currently now working in the pharmaceutical segment of our business society, doing a great job there. Charles, welcome.
Hey, Randy, appreciate it. Yeah, you know, what's interesting, still doing some podcasting, working for, Sirius and some other places. I've been in the pharmaceutical industry probably about 20 plus years. Once I learned in broadcasting, it's not always who you know or what you know. It's not always what you know, but who you know. And sometimes the who's you knows change. So you got to be prepared for those changes, as you well know.
Oh, yeah. Oh, there's no doubt. There's no doubt about that. Hey, I mentioned UCLA. How about college football? How about not only our Bruins, the Pac-12, college football in general? How huge a transition have these last couple of months been? And is it just a precursor for what may be happening here in the next few months?
Yeah, the thing that worries me is we're so anxious to get this $4 billion business and entity going, but there's young men and people that are associated with it that is going to make a difference. I think we can hope that we have a game, and I love to see the game of college football because we cover it, as you well know. But I also am cognizant that this virus could have a little bit different thought on what that's going to look like. And I think the part for me is I kind of keep saying we're going to get to the college football season. I don't know how many teams are going to be there, but are we going to be able to finish that season? That's just what seems to be the case. And the one thing that I just keep thinking about, we don't give trainers enough credit. That the training staffs and the medical staffs right now are going to be so overwhelmed with having to know who's quarantined, who's not quarantined, who can play, who's available, you've been in the situations like I have where we've been in locker rooms where guys have gotten sick. Like I can remember in 93, maybe we traveled to New England and we had like 10 guys with the flu. And that old New England locker room, if you remember, was just like smaller than a big walk-in closet.
A leaky walk-in closet.
Yeah, but it was 10 of us that were all getting IVs and we got the brakes beat off of us. I just say that to say I can remember our trainer pulling his hair out in a group of trainers. I can't imagine having 30 guys with COVID, and maybe they're not super sick, but some could be. Some are asymptomatic, but they have to be quarantined. So those are the kind of things that just make me think there's a lot that goes into this that not even the football side of it, which is the football side, is going to have to really play a big role. And I'm interested to see how that's going to look once we get closer to the season.
Yeah, I really believe personally there's going to be, like you said, a start. College football is going to be there. Notre Dame is going to go to Navy. There are going to be a lot of those great big early on matchups. The problem is, and no one's really talking about this, when in the case of Major League Baseball, they've got a specific site and they're going to play some games. Major League NBA is going to be in there. They refer to it as their bubble. How in the heck do you put 110 young men and coaches and staff and everyone else in a bubble that you can actually control? You can't control anything about what happened before they got there. But how do you do that for an entire football season? And how do you just manage that many people without coming across like a dang police state?
Yeah. So Randy, I think the best situation we've seen so far is in South Korea. But we're in America and we don't want to be told that our cell phone is being traced and contract tracing. And I get it. I understand that. But
Yeah.
the Korean Baseball Organization, or KBO, has been able to do it, and they haven't had a lot of issues. South Korea itself has been able to do it, but it's because their culture has said, look, we want to fight the disease versus this. So that's a whole nother subject, and we could probably talk about that all day, because I'm not saying we should do it that way. I'm just saying if we're going to do it, we have to be cognizant. But you just said this. Imagine after a big football game, you tell 100 guys on your team and the staff, hey, we're not going to celebrate. I don't want you to go to this party on campus. I want you to go back to your room. That's not going to happen. So I don't know how you're going to create a bubble. And that's what I'm concerned with. When kids get back on college campuses and they go to these games, whether they have fans or not, after a big win, you have parties and you have all these celebrations. Think about that. How are you going to control your guys and create the so-called bubble? That's the part that concerns me. And that's why I say we may start, but what's the finish going to look like? I have no idea.
Yeah, one thing, a few thoughts have come out, but one thing that's really interesting to me is, as we've seen so many of these schools now announce that they've got X number of players that are positive. I think it was Boomer Esiason on his Boomer and Geo show made mention last week about, it be almost being a competitive advantage he could see coaches taking advantage of, is, getting guys sick. And when you think about it, you go, well, I guess if they got sick now, they wouldn't be affected in football season. But yeah, and we know, we've been around football long enough. Coaches scheme. That's their basic nature. They scheme. And could that happen? I'd like to think it wouldn't, but I wouldn't be surprised.
No, I wouldn't be either. And I think we've talked about it for years, whether you love the commissioner of the NFL or not. I think there has to be somebody in college that can lay down mandates, because it would stop some of this stuff that we see with the SEC versus the Big Ten versus the Pac-12 versus the Big 12. If there was some uniformity, because I think in this situation, you need some uniformity. And even if people try to skirt the rules, it will still be a situation where we at least know, because right now, to your point, everybody's kind of taking the approach of, I'm going to give you the information, but I'm only going to give you the information that I want you to have. And I'm going to use the rest for my competitive advantage. If I can get, and coaches aren't going to say this, but you hit the nail on the head. If enough of my guys get COVID and they're diagnosed as positive, then I don't have to worry about it so much during the season. I don't lose my star running back. I don't lose my star wide receiver. I should be okay at that point. And I agree with you. We've been around this game a long time. Coaches are going to scheme. They're going to go to close to the line as possible. They're going to go over the line a little bit, but they're going to do everything they can to get a competitive advantage.
I mean, let's be real, Charles. How in the hell do you play sports, especially contact sports? And, I guess technically the NBA does not qualify as a contact sport, but it's awful close. There's a lot of contact per se. I mean, football may be a collision sport, but how do you block? How do you tackle? How do you cover? How do you do everything you need to do, guard a guy in basketball properly without basically getting in his space?
Well, I read somewhere, and Peter King had a really good article talking to two physicians about having offensive meetings versus defensive meetings, using bigger facilities to meet. But if you're an offensive lineman and you were an old lineman, I played tight end, we met as units, right?
Yeah.
Offensive unit. How are you going to meet and keep a spacing distance from that? How are you going to practice inside run drill where, even teams now, they don't call it inside run, but they still do a variation of it.
Yeah, 9-on-7 or whatever.
Whatever it's changed in that way, but I'm thinking, how are you going to keep people distance from each other? I don't know, because football, there's a lot of closeness in the locker room. Is the offense going to be in there certain times versus defense? They're really talking about all these things that sound good in theory, but how do you execute that? How do you really make that happen? That's the part for me that's going to be fascinating. When we come out on the other side and we read the stories about this, it's going to be really interesting to see who was able to do it the best and who was able to stay clear of any issues because they managed to do everything they could, and know by stroke of fate they got a break here or there. Really is what it's
Yeah.
going to.
Yeah, it just like you said, we've played this game, we've been in those drills, in the games itself. It's I just you've got to play, you got to test constantly, and honestly, and it sounds to a lot of people will sound like a lame statement, though. I think to a large degree, you got to trust in God that it's not going to happen.
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree. I mean, there's a lot of things that we want to control, but right now we're not in control. And
Yeah.
so we just have to hope and pray that no one gets really sick, because I think that's the part we're saying these young men, but the more I read it, it's younger people now that are getting this second wave that we're starting to see. So hopefully, I hope that doesn't happen. And I hope they are able to get the season started. And in a perfect world, we'll be able to see college football in some form of its entirety.
Hey, starting in Minneapolis, almost about a month and a half ago with the George Floyd murder, there have been some pretty amazing unrest in our country, in the world of sports. It's gone across every part of our society. And people act like, and we always do, that this is kind of the church of what's happening now. And everything that happens now is something that's unprecedented, and it's always the worst ever. And it doesn't get any worse than this, but not in the way of besmirching your birthday coming up this September, where you'll turn 52. You were born in '68, which is still the most divisive, the most violent, just the worst year our society's ever had. And you can go down the list, whether it was the assassination of Dr. King, the assassination of Robert Kennedy, the social and racial unrest in our country, the Vietnam War. There's so many things to just keep going on and on. We had our own pandemic where between 1 and 4 million people died of that H3N2, known as the Hong Kong flu back then. It was almost a carbon copy of this year, only worse, much worse from a violence standpoint. It almost seemed like coming out of that in the 60s and into the 70s, and then things that happened 80s, 90s. How did we not take advantage of that time to sort of not be we instead of they and us?
Yeah.
And where were the opportunities lost?
Yeah. Randy, you sat in the same locker room that I did at UCLA. And, I'm always amazed at people that come out of there, no matter, I'm on a group text with about 40 guys from my era, and we keep in touch. But I think the fascinating thing when I first went to UCLA is seeing Jackie Robinson, seeing Arthur Ashe, seeing so many, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, so many outspoken guys now. And even in your time, I mean, there were guys that were on that team that really had a voice. And I think the biggest thing for me is when I look back at the 60s, the year I was born, if you really wanted to make a change, you got in locker rooms and you got in discussions with people about what it is to be who you are. I think you saw that playing football, being in locker rooms with guys that didn't look like you, didn't come from the same socioeconomic background, maybe didn't even vote like you, but you knew when I got on the field, this guy was going to do everything he could to help me and vice versa. I might not like him. I might not want to go to dinner with him, but there's a common respect and a common bond that, hey, he's sincere. And I'm not going to let that be clouded by what is projected and what's portrayed and what sometimes the negative stereotypes about that said person. And when I look at this, I think now the same things the guys in the locker room were telling you, I could tell a guy at UCLA, I could tell a guy with the Colts. And if they really listened to me and they really heard and not just said, hey, I read this. No, I'm going to show you this. I'm going to show you what this looks like. I want you to understand me and really feel what this looks like, what it feels to be called the N-word. Well, I mean, it's some people, it's easy for them. It's in their vernacular. To go on golf courses and play at a golf course and see a noose hanging. And I know what a noose looks like. So, to see a cross burn down the street from a house that you live in as a black family because there are other black families there. This is all happening not in the 60s, but in the 80s, in the 90s. So I think to your point, it has to be a situation where people of any color says, I don't want this to happen anymore. I don't think this is right. And what can we do about it? What can we do about it? And I want to help you because maybe I hadn't listened to somebody before. And I've had these conversations that have been pretty good, but then I also say, well, that's a conversation. What is it going to do to actually move and make people really act and not say, well, that's so long ago. You just brought all those things up. When we have to look at history, we got to look at the violent, ugly parts of history, just like we do the romantic things that we see about history.
When did we decide not to really teach history, to teach selective history?
Yes.
And we both have kids.
Yes.
And my kids happened to go, or my daughters did, to a private school. They changed their textbooks like every year. And you didn't really think about it. You just said, oh, you needed a book, you needed a book. And my wife brought it up to me last night. She goes, what were they putting in those textbooks? Or what were they not putting in the textbooks? What were they editing out, especially from a history standpoint? Because, it's an old cliche, it's an old saying, but you really, if you forget or ignore history, you will repeat it.
You will. I agree. I don't know why there's a selective understanding that you have to, look at history and only look at the good parts. And then if you say something about it because you want history to be better, you want to remember that your uncles who served in Vietnam, look like me, couldn't come back and maybe go to certain places. You want to say that about the Tuskegee Airmen who so valiantly fought in the war, but wanted to come home and couldn't always come home to a place that really wanted them. Vietnam, all the things that we talk about. So there's some great parts of American history, but there's also some ugly, nasty parts of history that we have to say, okay, this happened. I understand what you're saying. And how do we, make sure we don't try to put that aside and say that never happened when we know it did. And I agree with you. When kids learn, like my kids, your kids, when they've learned these things, they've come home and said, did you know this? And sometimes the only reason I knew because I was a history major at UCLA, which opened up things to me, not just about African-American history, but history in general, the Turkish Empire, the progressive era of history, all those things that you had to go and research and learn from different articles and stories, the things you had to do. And it really is fascinating when sometimes you hear people talk about things and you're like, did you really research that, or did somebody just tell you and you're regurgitating that?
Yeah. I had someone in a conversation mention what's going on currently in our society with the word genocide. And I kind of flinched, and they were, what's wrong? I said, do you know what that word means? I said, do you know that, whether it's Christians or Jews or, one of the worst we've ever seen is the Armenian genocide, where they just went in and just wiped out people. So pump the brakes. Learn what that stuff really means before you just throw it around.
Yeah. Well, but I'm glad you brought up my birthday or 68, because it's interesting. I always go, whenever I'm in Memphis, I will go to the Lorraine Motel. And it's just, I always tell people, if you've never been, you need to go. It's fascinating, the size of that area. And, I'm not into conspiracy theories or anything like that, but just to see all the things that could have happened and knowing clearly that was somebody that had some sharpshooting or sniper ability to shoot from where they did to hit Dr. King. And I hate to say it in those forms, but you just look at things like that and you just see how, they've kept the motel pretty much the same, and it's just really eerie. But it's also a reminder of the violence and the destructiveness and how people hate. And I think if we can learn how to get people to get away from the hate and the anger that they have towards other people, or people of their skin color, or people of their religious beliefs, maybe we can start there and really try to make this thing a little bit different. But the George Floyd situation, he's from Houston, where I'm from, a little bit younger than me, but a lot of folks that I know him. And when I watched that, it was just, That could have been me. That could have been a couple of my teammates that I grew up with. That could have been anybody that I've known. And that part for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, whenever someone's asking for their mother who's been deceased, I mean, you know that. I mean, we play football. It's about dominance. But even when you dominate somebody, you give them a hand. And nobody really reached down and gave that young man a hand to get up and give him a chance to, see his family again. And that's the part that was the part that struck me the most, and it still does, even when I talk about it.
Yeah, you mentioned the 846. I mean, how does somebody not step in?
Yeah.
How does the person holding the cell phone, taking the video, not drop the damn phone and do something?
Yeah.
I mean, it is really stunning, and kind of back to the '68 theme thing, the Mexico City Olympics, the 200 meters, Tommy Smith and John Carlos on the stand with the original Black Power salute. A voice I really, really miss in this whole thing is Dr. Harry Edwards. Just an amazing man. Incredibly close friend with Bill Walsh while I was with San Francisco, and we used to have Dr. Edwards around us all the time. And like so many other things he did, Bill Walsh was light years ahead of a lot of people in things, and he was dealing with this almost exactly type of situation. And this is when he got into San Francisco in '79 was his first year?
Yeah.
88, 89 was his last year. And the whole time, Dr. Edwards was involved with that football team. And, Bill was doing the minority coaching program. He started that out in San Francisco, and a lot of that due to his relationship with Dr. Edwards. But that's a voice that, we need somebody like that.
Yeah, I don't know Dr. Harry Edwards like you, but everybody that's been around him and just kind of talks about what his impact, not only in sports, but just in society and what it meant. You guys got to see that up close and personal. And, Bill Walsh is always interesting to me. I've read books about him. I didn't play for him like you did, but I know Dusty Baker pretty well. And Bake just speaks so highly of Bill Walsh.
Yeah. Great job with him, by the way, on your podcast. That was really interesting.
Yeah, thanks. And he's, the thing that I always admired about that was a situation where you have a coach saying, okay, I need to impact all my players. And if I'm going to do that, I need somebody that's going to come in and help them understand from a sociology kind of background and how I can bring these different cultures together. And I'm sure he did things. I mean, we see coaches doing that now, but I really do think that was ahead of its time, because you really have to know your players and know that they think you care, or they feel like you care, or they know, hey, this guy's got my best interest, even though he wants me to perform at a high level.
And more importantly, maybe, hey, this guy really does care.
Yeah.
He's not only going to say it, he's going to show it, and he's going to do it. Mm-hmm. And that's when you can start having those conversations.
Yeah. No, I agree. I'll go back to the time at UCLA. It's when you're on a college campus where there's been so much, where there's been a Black Panther movement, where there's been so many people that have come before you that have been outspoken and really say things, it just makes you think, I can't go into the world, and if there's something that's not right, that I can't speak on. I have to speak on it. And I have to, have a voice for those that don't have a voice. And what I always find is fascinating is that so many people that are outspoken, that have come through there, I can see why, because you're taught, if you have a voice and you don't use it, shame on you. And I think that's the part for me, and meeting you years ago when you were at CBS, and I started talking, you and Doc Walker were a couple of guys that Terry Donahue said, hey, you got to meet these guys. They're UCLA guys. Start talking to you, and it's interesting how that has evolved to where we are now. But the beauty of it was, he knew right then, hey, these are guys that are similar to you. They'll speak their mind. They're not afraid to say how they feel. And I think that's why, to this day, I don't believe in karma. I think God has always puts us in place with people that we're supposed to be with at those certain times.
Yeah. So what's in the future for Charles Arbuckle? What's up with you coming into, besides the pharmaceutical business? What's new and exciting?
Well, I'm still like every year I do the Bayou Classic, which I hope we get to do again this year.
Yeah.
Still doing some stuff on Sirius XM, and this podcast I'm doing, man, has been really fun. It's given me a chance to get my old teammates or folks that I know are interesting, and you hear the stories. I think what people want now are good stories. They want to hear something to take them away from being cramped in the house or worried about the outbreak of COVID and those things. So that's kind of how it started. And I really enjoy it. It's called Chopping It Up with Buck. It's really, to me, it's like barbershop meet, cigar lounge meet, just, just
Yeah.
hanging out in the backyard, just talking, kind of the thing we all like to do.
You mean like most network guys' nightmare? No format?
Well, no, I mean, yeah, I would say that's true, but it seems like they're letting us do a little bit more now.
That's true.
It used to
That's
be,
true.
hey, Randy, this. It used to be, you can't say that, and you're sitting in the chair like, what do you mean I can't say that? We just talked about it in the meeting. No, you can't say that. Okay, I'm going to say something. You can't tell me I can't say this, but maybe I can't say that. Okay, you have to negotiate while you're sitting there waiting for the camera to come to you. So, no, I mean, I love being able to do that. And, you've had a podcast for a number of years. You know how that is. It gives you the freedom to really talk to people and have dialogue so people can know more the person as opposed to just a 30-second or a minute sound clip.
What's the status with your camps? Because you do
Yes.
some unbelievable work with kids that are getting a look. Everyone assumes scholarships are easy and playing in college football is easy. And when I was doing camps, I used to be real specific that it isn't about those 120 something or 120 schools that are so-called Division I. So there's a Division II, there's a Division III. You can play at any level, but you got to get a look. And what you do out of Charlotte there and in Carolinas is get kids that look.
Yeah. So what we do is called the Carolina Senior Football Showcase, really predicated on what I saw Coach Donahue doing a few years back. Basically, it's D3, D2, and NAIA kids coming together for one day, and we have the coaches from those staffs that fly in and they work the kids out. This was our fourth year this year, and before COVID struck, we had a real good. It was actually in late February, surprisingly. So we got some folks to that event. I think about 100, 150 kids, 25, maybe 26 schools that came out, and they worked them out. Now the problem is, are they going to get signed because of this year? I think we will have some young men get into college. We're now in year 4, so we've got some that have graduated, some that have. We had a couple of guys that came my first and second year that didn't have anything, walked away with, maybe having to pay $1,000 out of pocket. So we're still going to continue to do that. Got to get you down for that. It's a great weekend. We get a lot a lot of local guys here, but I think the most impressive thing is getting them the opportunity to get educational equity. I think Charlotte they had a survey that they did here. Charlotte was one of the lowest rated upward mobility from a socioeconomic cities, and there were a bunch of other ones, but Charlotte was like 49 out of 50. And the thing that surprised me about it is if you look at 10 zip codes in Mecklenburg County or around the Charlotte metro area, those kids generally don't go to school or they don't leave those areas. And that's what we're trying to do, is to make sure that we reach out to those young men. The kids in South Carolina come pretty consistently, and we get a nice contingent from North Georgia. Mel Farr Jr. and his brother Mike are doing one in Atlanta. I think they missed this year because they did it in Detroit. But there's about 6 showcases across the country, and ours being one. And yeah, we look forward to year 5. I mean, because it just, to me, what it does is it gives us an opportunity. I'm just kind of the conduit, but it's a bunch of guys that help me with it, and we've had a really good time helping these young men get an opportunity to go to college.
Yeah, there's another one of our fellow TV brothers, Aaron Taylor, ex-Notre Dame, works with me there at CBS, that's done a lot of stuff in mental health.
Yes.
And is that something that we've got to emphasize? And we've talked about that whole us and them becoming we and being in the locker rooms and how can we sort of make things connect. How important is mental health as we're going through these things like the quarantines and the bubbles and isolating kids and isolating teams? That's got to be a mental health crisis waiting to happen.
Man, Randy, I'm glad you brought that up because that's the one thing I've been kind of really driving on these conversations with people. You know, I think we think that all of us, meaning all football players, all athletes, are warriors, and they are.
Mm-hmm.
But even if you're a warrior, you can still have anxiety. Even if you're, a strong, strapping guy or lady, you can still have depression. You can still have bipolar or schizophrenia or any of those number of things that's a label attached that people don't want to be labeled. I say that to say we talk about the training staffs. Most of these schools now have a better mental health aspect of their college environment, and that's going to have to really ramp up, especially with COVID. And I think we're starting to look at ourselves even closer because you have so much time to identify, hey, am I doing all the right things? Am I working through this? Am I being the best that I can when I go to work or when I go and when I'm in front of my kids? And I think you're right. I think the mental health aspect, I can't remember the NFL having the resources that they have now. And I tell these young guys, you got to use it because when you leave the game, I mean, you played a long time, how was it for you when you left the game? How did you feel? How was the transition? Yeah, it was hard.
It was real hard.
I don't know who, I haven't talked to anybody, whether they played and left the game, at their own accord, which very few of us get to do, not having some kind of struggle. And we see that now even more since we've been kind of in this cocoon of home and COVID and everything else. So I agree with you. I think the mental health aspect has to be talked about more. And Aaron has been on the forefront of that for a long time. And
Yeah,
he tells funny stories. But I tell you what, when he was on my initial just audio podcast, I almost started crying just listening to his story because it was so powerful. And it had such a true feeling of, hey, I've been there, maybe not as bad or maybe not quite what you did, but I know exactly what you're saying.
And only the professionals that are sort of in that side understand that every player, every person's got those stories. There are those stories. I don't care what the subject is. I don't care what the issue is. Yeah. They're there. And if you just leave them laying there, it's not healthy.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, one last thing on that. Jason Wilson wrote a book, Cry Like a Man, and it's a really good book. If you ever saw the episode of This Is Us, the Dojo episode was based on something that he was doing in Detroit with young kids, young African-American kids. And he had a view of him and his son. He was working with them and he was having them boxing, and his son couldn't quite get it. So he started crying and he was like, "Why are you crying?" And he said, "Because I can't get this right." And he said, "This is the first time you've done this. Don't get upset. It's okay." And then they show him, maybe 10 years later. And I mean, he's striking. So I sent that to my son and I said, I wish that I had been more like this when you were growing up, instead of saying to you, be tough, be a man, because sometimes there is a fear factor in doing those things. But if we show kids and show young men how to understand and how to tap into, you may have that feeling, but it's okay. Don't fight it. And it was really impactful for me because I could see what good looks like and how we have to raise young men and raise young women to be better and mentally not to put so much pressure on them, because that's what we do in society anyway. How can we as parents and uncles and mentors do a better job with the kids when they come to us? That was really the gist of it. And it was strong. And he thanked me for it. And it was just good because I haven't been able to see him consistently, but we've been able to spend more time and getting to know each other better and spending more time talking, going through things that maybe I didn't know how to do. But as you learn, as you get older, you learn. There's no book on parenting, right?
No. Thank goodness. Because you get to some of those mistakes are some of the best things that ever happened to you.
Yeah, exactly. You come out on the other side and you're all happy and it's better. But I'm glad there was no social media when we were learning how to be parents.
Oh, amen. Hey, on that note, Charles, thank you so much for joining us and taking this chunk of time out to talk about some stuff that I think are pretty important.
Appreciate it, Randy. Always good talking to you.
All right, Charles. All right, fantastic stuff there from Charles Arbuckle. Thank you so much, Charles, for joining us, and I hope everyone out there enjoyed that interview. It's a little longer than normal, but just some awful good stuff in there. Let's go right now to my sports. The world of sports, we're back at it. The Rocket Mortgage Golf Tournament, covered by my guys at CBS Sports that are doing such a fantastic job in some really incredible circumstances. Detroit Country Club, beautiful place, really good tournament, and it was won by a guy that's just been dominating on the PGA Tour. Bryson DeChambeau won that tournament. He's hitting the ball further than most everybody. He's hitting the ball closer to the pins than most anybody. He's a very analytical type. He also happens to have gained about 30 pounds since last golf season. So a lot of lifting weights, things you don't associate with golf. Eating about 3,000 to 4,000 calories a day and winning big checks and big trophies. That was the Rocket Mortgage in Detroit this last weekend. Well, Indianapolis was the scene for anything racing, it seemed like. They had the Brickyard 100 for NASCAR, and that race was won by Kevin Harvick. I came across this weekend, and yeah, this is very appropriate. The Ocho, the 8. Remember the movie Dodgeball? If you can dodge a wrench, you can dodge a ball. Well, I came across this Saturday night with the family. It was dodgeball between Canada, our neighbors to the north, our attic, and the USA. And yeah, Canada had a big lead. At one point, I think it was 10-2. USA stormed back. My favorite part of this whole thing is the announcers. I mean, you got to enjoy the intensity. Check this out.
Wanted to do that set. You saw him run up there. His teammates say no.
He's taking a quick breath. Electing to throw the ball. Dodges the ball, stays in bounds.
He
Unbelievable.
stayed in bounds. Or they got to hold him for 50 seconds because they got the numbers.
Oh, the catch!
Jordan caught it. Look at O'Brien. O'Brien can't believe it.
O'Brien crossed
Jordan
USA.
caught it.
Avoiding the sweep on the day. A big win for the men. Unbelievable.
Jordan, last minute sub, comes in.
They are into it. Oh no, it's fantastic stuff, and I kid because I care. I'm glad they're getting televised. I think it's fantastic. They're televising cornhole these days, so why not dodgeball? What can I say? All right, that'll do it for sports. Let's go to the feel-good story of the week.
This is the good news. This is the good news.
All right, our feel-good story of the week is again going to involve a cat. In fact, in this case, Kevin the cat. And as Kevin the cat has his story told, we come to find out maybe she's not a Kevin?
What? When we first started noticing this cat kind of coming around, checking out our patio and kind of watching us from afar, we started seeing him quite a bit more, almost every day. So I started putting out a little bit of food for him. He really would just kind of come around, eat the food and treats that we gave him, and then sort of just lay around on our patio. I was nervous at first to let him in because we do have a dog named Murphy who is cat friendly, but we had no idea how Kevin would react. Just went right up to our 70-pound dog and was like, hey, you're my friend now. Going around to different vets to see if he was microchipped. Brought him in. She brought Kevin back in the room and said Kevin is a girl, and congratulations because she's super pregnant. Kevin's appointment was on a Friday, and then on Wednesday, April 1st, she started to go into labor. She ended up being amazing. She had 4 kittens. They're adorable. We love them to pieces. After 5 days, we started letting Murphy in to see them, and we were really nervous at first. You know, we didn't know how he would react. We didn't know if Kevin would get really defensive and protective over her kittens. But she just welcomed him right in. He just loves it. He lays there and lets it happen. So Kevin's kittens have all been adopted. Kevin, we have decided to keep. She's gonna stay with us. We told Murphy he could keep her. He and Kevin are still best friends. Kevin kind of walked into our lives at the perfect time. With everything happening in the world, having them here has just been a blessing.
Also, congratulations are in order. Kevin or whoever, you, the kittens, El Doggo, and the rest. Fantastic stuff. All right, I want to remind you, when it comes to finding this podcast, where do you do it? Well, start at randycross.com. You can always get it there. You can get it at barnburner.ca. You can get it at growingtruth.com. You get it at YouTube, iTunes, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all over the place. But start at randycross.com. So you all have a good time, good week. We will see you in about 7 days. And always remember, hold my beer is a happy trails waiting to happen.